Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am Tamara Johnson. Shealey, good morning. It is Saturday, the last Saturday in June. OMG. Let me see where my trusty co host is this morning.
Good
There he
morning.
is.
How you
Good
doing?
morning, David.
I'm
I
I'm
am
I'm
good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm anxiously awaiting my Tamara for Senate T-shirt.
For those of you who can't
So,
see it, let me go this way. It is
so
coming. It's coming.
all right.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning. It's been a long week, David. I am preparing for my next leg of my journey. I have solidified the dates. I'm going to get on the road and I'm going to do a 10 county tour of the hardest hit coronavirus areas here in the great state of Georgia. And I'm
Well,
going in to have those, find out how people are doing. What can we do
yeah.
to remedy some of their issues? Like lots needs to happen, David.
Yes, definitely does. And we're entering into a period which is probably um, developing into one of the great crises of U.S. history, um, and that's going to send us uh, into some very fraught situations where we're going to have to make some decisions about what we, as a people and as working people, are going to how we are going to address the 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 combined crises of pandemic and economic crisis and a crisis of rule with um, Trump and Barr and the attempts to um, impose themselves uh, on the 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 political structure to take control of it. Um, and we're already beginning to see some of the ways in which the ruling elite is fighting back and to contain and control what Trump is doing. Um, and we're also seeing an enormous upsurge in mass activity and pretty radical shift to the left within the Democratic Party. Um, Longstanding corporate centrist Democrats are being thrown out of office, being primaried out of office. So the party itself is really going through a shift that that the Republican Party went through, starting, well, not even starting really with Obama, but during the last almost two generations of becoming a party of white people, of the protection of white privilege, and uh, and of white supremacy. And so
Mhm.
we're beginning to see a real polarization now. In some ways, it's similar to what happened at the end of the Civil War. Um, I don't know where we are on the actual Civil War itself, but the
Well, I think we're somewhere close, David. I mean, it's a little frightening,
yeah.
when, you know, people are walking around with, storming capitals. I
With what?
said there's, storming some of these
Yeah,
capitals and and with these rifles and guns,
yeah.
and
Well, I'm
I
not.
think we're on the verge of something.
Well, certainly there are these people, that have for decades now, been, white supremacist militia groups and if you think back on Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing, those things were really part. And there are white supremacists that are in the military as well. They just stopped a guy from
And in police forces, right?
and in the police forces. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So but now they're really becoming ideological, and that's why I have they are ideologically committed to a race war. They feel that, and it isn't clear just how much that is that they think it's going to be a military response, but or how much of it is a military response. But I don't think that there is. Um, I don't think they have a mass base for that, but they certainly do have a mass base for protecting white supremacy.
They got enough damn guns.
They got enough damn guns, yes. And the thing is that there are 300 million guns in the United States, but 80% of them are in the hands of 20% of the gun owners. That's the thing that they don't really talk about very much. Um, and there's a very strong corporate connection to that. The gun manufacturers working through their lobbying and business association, namely the NRA, which is that's what it is, um, are really committed to promoting the sale of guns. And
Kelly, listen to Mr. Armstrong. Kelly Loeffler silent on Michigan open carry, but having an issue with the same activity in Georgia speaks volume on her dog whistle.
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I don't want to get too caught up in this part, but my response is to say or my argument is that the only way to respond to these appeals to race war is by appealing to class war. We have to begin to mobilize a cross-class response that is principled. In other words, in which the affirmative action, the affirmative struggle for equality is the basis for European American working people participating in a class-wide struggle against the ruling interests. These people with the race war are really just they're primarily what they are is agents of the most extreme wing of the ruling elite.
So let me make a comment right there. When you talk about a class war, you're talking about the 99%, the 1%.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, I think this is where Black America doesn't feel heard, is when you talk about the data that shows by 2053, Black America will have zero net wealth.
Right.
So how do we bring everybody into this fold where Black people feel like we're like on the bottom anyway?
Yeah. And that's why I'm kind of setting a bit of a historical stage for what we're talking about. We're in what seems to many people, including many Black people, to be an unprecedented period in which European Americans and other people of color, besides African Americans, have been acting in solidarity. With Black Lives Matter over the police murders and it's spreading to much wider issues. But what I'm suggesting here is that there have been times in the past in which European Americans have reached out, in support of African Americans, and what's happened is that at the end of a cycle of this kind of a crisis, the ruling elites have been able to readjust and rearrange the racial privilege system, and European Americans have taken the bait. They have decided that that they're white and not working class. In effect, I mean
And
that
that's where the privilege lies. You know, you talk
that's
about
yeah,
white privilege. It's
yeah,
a privilege to be white.
yeah. It is a privilege in the sense and privilege is a. I mean, there are two different words here: privilege and benefit. Right? There's a reason why these are two different words, because they're two different things. Okay, privilege is a situation in which one group of people gets a set of favors um, from the powers that be. Uh, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a benefit. And I keep talking about
But obviously, white people don't see the difference. Like you're trying to explain the difference.
exactly.
They
Yes.
don't see the difference.
They don't see the difference between privilege and benefit, and what's even more important is they're radical leaders, the most progressive people.
So, David, go into why it's not a benefit, because I don't want us to leave that
Yeah,
word on the table and them feel like, well, it is privilege is a benefit, but
yeah,
why is it
yeah.
not a benefit?
Well, that involves really rethinking your status in the society, because it what looks to be a situation in which European Americans have advantages, in fact, a looking at the situation from a different perspective. In other words, from a class and non-white perspective. Um, you realize that class solidarity, that is us working together as working people, would bring in much more in the way of uh, power and control and income
Okay, but
than
stay there with that thought, power and control. But what
yeah
if this white privilege gives you power? It gives you control. It
it
is individualized. Is something that you can benefit from, and it doesn't help the collective.
yes
But
yeah
I mean, how do you like somebody's like, well, this works for me. It may not work for all of us, but it's working for me.
yeah
How do you get white people to see beyond me and look at us?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you are asking exactly the questions that don't get asked, you know, uh, and they don't get asked in the, in among the the white left or among the black left. So we're talking past each other, and the issue is, um, first of all, are the people that are giving you these answers that, well, as an individual, this helps me, so the heck with you, right? um, that is the kind of thinking, that kind of individualistic thinking is really the infiltration of ruling class ideology into working people. I mean, if there's anything that this coronavirus pandemic has taught us, is how interrelated we are, how much we depend on each other, and at the same time, it's taught us how unequal, the society is. With two, three times the death rates for people of color, and particularly for African Americans, because they are frontline workers, because they are living in the most vulnerable conditions. But that doesn't mean. I mean, look at what's happening in the Sun Belt states now. Young people are getting sick. Now they may not die, but we know that the coronavirus, for at least a significant portion of them, has long range effects. So every time you do something like go out without a mask, not only are it's not so much that you're protecting yourself, you're protecting everyone around you, you know, and that's the logic, that's the dynamic of class solidarity. That's the dynamic of beloved community, as as the black preachers, talk about it. That's the logic of power with, as opposed to power over. So yeah,
There's a level of consciousness that comes with being able to.
absolutely,
And
yes.
why is it this? Why can't most? Is it that most white people don't have that level of consciousness? Like,
No,
what is it? Why can't they see that?
yeah. My mentor, and the guy that I've studied and loved, I mean, I think he was really one of the most important thinkers. Theodore William Allen talks about this as a war within white people themselves, okay, between their class consciousness and their race consciousness, and the whole society is set up to reinforce the race consciousness and to downplay the class consciousness. But European Americans, 2/3, maybe even 3/4 of them are working class, and I insist that there is a group, that's good morning, Barb. I insist that there is a group that I call the 9.9%. They are the strata that are the actual enablers of the ruling elite. They're the ones who are in Congress. They're the ones who manage and run corporations and help with financing, and they do get real material privileges out of the system. But for the rest of us, the 90, and that's why I really don't like that 99% and 1%. That is a really bad way of looking at what's going on. What that 9.9% does to the rest of us is it keeps us in this ideological and structural. It's both. It's both ideological and structural. Uh, 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 race war, race conflict. And it does not do us any good when we talk about the 99% to cover up and bury that group of enablers, I would call them, in that mix. And 98% of them are white, by the way. There is a small sliver, maybe it's a little larger, in the last decade or so, of African American and other people of color that are part of that 9.9%. But for the rest of us, what we are facing is a situation of structural inequality and mental segregation. All right. We're mentally segregated from each other as much as we are, in physical distance and in terms of the unequal access to the society's resources. And I was listening the other night, last night, wonderful that this gay city council member, I can't remember his name now, won the 15th congressional district. African American. He grew up in the projects, in the the city housing projects in the Southeast Bronx. To a single mother, he won the city council seat. He just defeated a homophobic congressional 15th New York 15th congressional district. 20 years, this guy, homophobic, pro-Trump Democrat, has been in there. He unseated him, and he talked about what he called racially concentrated poverty, right? Now that's a term that we have, that a lot of people have been using to understand why it is that, this 15th congressional district is the most Democratic district in the entire country. All right.
What state is this?
New York, New York. It's Southeast Bronx. Um, and I'm not sure where else, how the districts, but the core of it is there. And it's been represented by a guy who was voting for Trump, you know. So and a homophobe and, and everything else. But this idea that we live in a society of racially concentrated poverty should scream, should have European American working people screaming to high heaven. How can we allow the concentration of working people, of concentrated poverty to a group of working people? It should be a visceral act of solidarity to say we've got to get out of this. And if you think about it in a, use a lot of this requires imagination, to understand. But suppose that poverty was not racially concentrated. Suppose that there were, a significant portion of that population was European American, in other words, poor white. And what that would mean in terms of how much influence and power they could exercise to get themselves out of that poverty. Well, the thing is that there are, little pockets of European American poverty all over this country. It's not as concentrated as the poverty of African Americans. And many of those poor whites have somebody in their families, let's say, or in their extended communities that can help them out much more so. In other words, the resources are accessible more. But that is part of the way that the structure isolates us from one another. It's the same kind of thing as in the period of slavery. I mean, the African Americans, the large majority of African Americans were hereditary chattel bond servants. At the same time, they were the core of the working class in this country. And European American workers all around them, were put in the position of denying, solidarity with this, with the core of the working class, and so something was wrong. Something is wrong with that picture.
Well, who the hell wanted to be a slave? I mean, come on now. so if they had aligned themselves with chattel slaves, like who the hell wants to be a slave?
Well,
at least I'm not a slave.
The point I'm making here is not that the repudiation of privilege did not mean, okay, enslave me, right? The repudiation of privilege meant join the abolitionists, join John Brown. You were saying, people don't know who John Brown is. John Brown in 1859, 1 year before the Civil War, tried to, European American man, very, very religious, moved from abolitionism to armed insurrection. He organized a group that seized an arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, 1859. And he tried to get those arms out into the Shenandoah Valley, and distribute them among African American bond servants, and he almost succeeded. The guy who it turned out was in charge of the military unit that actually defeated him, surrounded the arsenal, and shot his sons and several African American men who had joined with them, free African American men, and he was arrested and put on trial and hanged. The guy who was the major who was in charge of that operation was Robert E. Lee,
who we celebrate.
Yeah, who were trying now to tear down the statues. Yeah.
Mhm.
So since 2017, in Charlottesville, that's who those white supremacists were defending, and who that guy was driving his car in. Um, so so the point is that there was movement in that direction, and this guy he wasn't a nutcase. I mean, two of the people who he conspired with were Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. They met with him and they decided this is a little bit too far for me to go, and I've got other work, and so he went on his own, but he was hanged for this. And during the Civil War,
Stay right there with that point. So white people see by being in solidarity, this is historical based on your
right,
account here. Being
yeah,
in solidarity will get me hung. So there is no incentive there to say,
yeah,
why should I be in solidarity with these
yeah.
people? There was no incentive then, and they don't really see one now.
Right, and Ted Allen used to joke that probably the first place where we're going to see equality is inside the jails, because there'll be many more European Americans getting arrested than in the past. But structurally, I'm not asking everybody to go out and be a John Brown, not yet, not at first. I mean, I'm not doing it. But the point is that there's a process there, and the process is taking these, like microaggressions, taking acts of micro solidarities in response to microaggressions, where you speak out, where you put yourself between, in demonstrations, as European Americans, we put ourselves between, as you talked about in your famous your anecdote about Ferguson, with the older white women who were standing between the black youth and the police. And now we're really seeing that more and more and more. But what Ted argues is that is that unless we really get to that existential leap, in which and as I say, I don't think of woke as being something where you snap your fingers. It's a process, right? And the more you are woke, the more you go through that process, the harder it is to go back, you know, because you recognize that your own liberation is tied up with the people of color around you, and it begins a process. Well, it's not irreversible, because to now let me just say something else about the Civil War. Black people freed themselves during the Civil War, and they did it in two ways. They went and joined the Union Army. 200,000 black, mostly, I guess, joined the Union Army. The other way is they started an insurrection among African American, enslaved people. It was an insurrection and a general strike in the South. And the other part of that equation was that 300,000 white Southerners joined the Union Army. People don't talk about that. There were whole counties in Mississippi and Alabama, the Free State of Jones. They made a movie about it, in Mississippi. I now just found out from an old European American, old civil rights worker, my age, I say old, Heather Gray, just wrote up an account of the Free State of Winston in northern Alabama. Those poor whites in northern Alabama and northern Mississippi, where the plantations weren't, where they were just poor white farmers, understood that they were being asked to fight to protect the property of the ruling class, of the big slave owners, and they resisted, and they continued to resist during Reconstruction. Reconstruction was a period in which black and white working people took over state governments all over the South. And very few of them were the African Americans, the majority. They relied on the poor whites to vote them into office, and a lot of those poor whites. Can you imagine what it would be like if poor whites in the state of Georgia voted for the Democrats? I mean, the Republicans would be out of office in one election cycle. So keeping us apart is crucial. And the permanency of keeping us apart has to do with keeping us unequal. So the structural inequalities, structural white supremacy, and all of these things that people are now becoming aware of is not simply to keep Black people down. The only reason to keep Black people down, it's not like the ruling class has any particular animosity toward. They just want to make profits. But this social control system is so profitable for them. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue that we need to face. And ironically, what we are facing now is that one of the worst times for Black-white solidarity, one of the worst times for Black-white solidarity was the New Deal. And if
the no New Deal that we didn't receive.
the FDR, everybody call them, now we need a New Deal. We need a Green New Deal. We need this, that, and the other thing. I'm an FDR Democrat. That was one of the worst periods of white supremacy. That was the nadir. That was the period of Jim Crow. And the Democratic Party was run lock, stock, and barrel by Dixiecrats. They ran Congress. And every measure that was introduced, every reform measure during the New Deal, not only, people now know a little bit about Social Security, excluding, agricultural and domestic workers, which was 80% of the Black folks in the South worked in those categories. What they don't talk about is the fact that there were millions of European American farm workers that were excluded from the Social Security, but they were also excluded from the National Labor Relations Act. They didn't have the right to organize, and from any number of other things, including the GI Bill. At the end of World War II. So all of these things created this phenomenon that Ted Allen was talking about, which is the restructuring of the racial privilege system, adapting it to the new circumstances in which industrial workforce was becoming increasingly important for the capitalist class to maintain control over, because those were people who were going on mass strikes over and over again during the period of the Depression and the Second World War, and afterwards they dangled this bait in front of the European Americans. You will have private labor unions that will enter into contracts with giant corporations, and the unions were overwhelmingly white. The only reason that Black people got into industrial employment, they had been kept out for two, 3 generations, was because of the March on Washington movement in 1940, which forced Roosevelt to issue an executive order that said you can't discriminate in defense industries in any, which was almost all the industry at that point, was so the.
David is right about Reconstruction. The people governed until the federal government abandoned the progress and all slaves.
Yeah. And we are at that kind of a situation now. We're in that set of circumstances where the radical Republicans of today, are the left wing of the Democratic Party.
And good morning. We'll come back to that, David. Good morning, Egberto.
Good morning. How are you guys doing this morning?
We are doing good. We're doing good. David is on his soapbox today.
No, David actually is on fire. I mean, David. I mean, I was just sitting down there listening, and every time I decided, maybe I'll come in and do my thing. Now it's like, no, let me keep listening to David. um, man, it's great because it is funny. It seems that we're on the same topic for the week, David. My show a couple of days ago was Capitalism Needs Racism in Some Form with Police as the Enforcer. That was the title of one of my shows. And it's funny that you're talking about that today because you hit the nail on the head. It's, people, humans are humans, the only way to keep control, a few people like that, like what I was saying on the program, the 1% can only keep control if they have the rest of us fighting each other. They create this hierarchical structure, like you just mentioned. And one of the perfect ways to do it is, hey, I'm black. So if I can immediately see that distinction, so we can compartmentalize right there, that's what they did, and then that's what kept the surface. So I enjoyed that first part with the,
and I want to emphasize again that they have enablers in the upper strata of the population. The 0.1% has a 9.9%, and there's a liberal wing and a conservative wing. I mean, you've talked about this as well. Republican and Democrat. In that 9.9%. And they serve to maintain that structural inequality among the rest of us. So I really think that it's very important that we see that part of that 9.9% is in the Democratic Party.
You said something that really hit me when you talked about, I think it was Georgia you were talking about. You said, suppose those poor whites saw whose side they really should be on and join forces, because that is actually very powerful, right? Because that is a real problem now. In fact, even the Democrats now, there is a progressive wave. Tamara is on that progressive wave. There's a whole lot of new politicians that are on this progressive wave. And the people that are really stopping it, it's not the Republicans, it's the Democrats.
Right.
If you take a look at, I mean, you gave an example of that run in New York, right? Why the hell should that guy have been representing that district in the first place if he didn't have Democratic support from the machine?
Right.
New York is a machine town. So the only way to break the machine is doing an AOC or doing a what's this guy's name that just beat another incumbent?
Yeah. I mean, that was massive win.
That was just on the order of AOC, and the thing about it is that's where the country is. And even, we have that vestige of the right-wing white folk that still have that thing in the back of their head, that still believe all the crap, and that's the ones that don't want to wear face mask and all of that. I said, well, go ahead and let natural selection take over. I quit,
We didn't see that one coming, Egberto.
Well, that's how I see. But how are you guys doing this morning?
Virus does not distinguish.
Because I so enjoy, I listen to the show because it's always so informative and entertaining. I just love what you guys are doing out here. I just love it. In fact, I cut a piece.
We got to get him a T-shirt. Get him a T-shirt.
We got to get you a T-shirt.
I know. I got to buy a T-shirt. You have to remember that. I would not ask her to send me a T-shirt. I got to buy a T-shirt.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, because man, we got to get her. You can't do this when you become senator, right?
I got to figure out how. I still want to do it. I don't want to stop.
David is still there. Your other half is still there.
And Robbie will be right there too. So
And Robbie will be
we
right
still
there
got a team. We can still do this. Absolutely.
You can still, but you
And
know,
you'll still come on.
well, you know what? Let me tell you, when you get all those big names around you and so forth, you think she's gonna still remember us, David?
Absolutely. I know from whence I come.
I'm plumping for a staff job, you know.
David, you're not even trying to leave Georgia.
That's right. I'd have to be staff here.
Yeah, there you go.
I ain't going to DC. Forget that.
But you know, today my topic is to ask y'all a question. And the question is, where are we going with coronavirus? I am going to be very honest with everybody. I am genuinely lost as far as the direction of this country. I think this thing is out of the bag, and I don't know how we let it back in. I think this is one of those conditions that can destroy empire. What I mean is, I think this virus has it can so decimate our country that we lose that strong position that we used to be in. We have aircraft carriers that are infested with coronavirus. We have our military infested with coronavirus. What Donald Trump failed to see is that coronavirus doesn't know boundaries, doesn't know nationalities, doesn't know anything. And the countries who saw that, they're fine. New Zealand is fine. Europe, they're knocking out, they're playing whack-a-mole. We are still having a massive infection. And I think other than destroying our economy, I think that this can destroy our position of power. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, because the honest truth is, I don't know.
So my 17, well, he's 18 now, let me get it right. He made a comment to me just the other day, and he was talking about flattening the curve, and he now gets it. Like, and I was so proud. He was like, Mom, I get it. He was like, I think, wearing a mask, and I do understand them talking, the significance of flattening the curve. He got it. But one thing he said following up to that, he said was, this will be our new normal, and it will be as common and as natural as the common cold. So I think that this is something that we will have to learn to live with, because I don't honestly, Egberto, want to see this country shut down again. When I think about, I told you I come from the beauty and barber industry. When I think about the impact that it had on beauty and barber professionals who are still struggling to recover, I'm getting information that salons people aren't coming back to get their hair done and getting these personal services at the rate that we thought they would, in addition to them already operating at some lower capacity. So people are still not in a good place with working every day, doing everyday work. So I don't know how we navigate this, but however we do, it has to become a part of our new normal, because like I said, I don't want to see this country shut down again.
Before can I ask you another thing, Tamara, because this is a real question for people that are out there, right? And that is, as being in the business, how do we let me tell you one thing first. I think that this thing, there's a certain percentage of the population who this thing doesn't affect, and it's a large percent of the population that lives just fine with this thing, and there's another percentage that gets sick and will recover fine. But there is a distinct percentage that simply gets this stuff and they're going to die. Are we resigned to say, again, this is sort of a natural selection thing, right? Are we supposed to just go ahead and get the folks who are not going to be able to tolerate that and let them die? Suppose it's your son, suppose it is your mother, suppose it is, do you try not to save them, or do you just, I don't know. That is why I'm saying this is such a new place for us all, I think.
So, the key word, Egberto, you said let. I don't think any of us have any power or control over this virus. None of us do. So let is, we just have to be open to whatever is about to happen before us. We can do all that we can individually. I'm taking my vitamins. I'm making sure I'm well rested. I'm trying to eat as best I, fruits and veggies, and I'm trying to do everything I can to stay healthy. But I don't think, any of us have any control over who's going to live and who's going to die.
Well,
And go ahead, David.
Yeah, I disagree with that really very strongly, because there's a class struggle going on within this epidemic, within this pandemic, and I'm afraid that what's happening is similar to what Naomi Klein talked about in the shock doctrine, and crisis capitalism is finding ways to maintain social control, and that's the piece that's really missing, and at the same time profit from what's going on, because there are people, there are drug corporations that are positioning themselves to make billions and billions and billions of dollars off of treatment and what do you call it, vaccination, right? And there are people who the corporate elite is arranging itself around that kind of a restoration, part of which is going to be getting us to accept and adapt to the kind of deaths that should be. I mean, keep in mind that we're going to have this whole thing that it's just like the flu, this message that Trump is sending. Even if it was the case, what that would mean is that the flu deaths, the pandemic deaths, would be on top of the flu deaths, right?
Yeah.
But how much control do we really have, though?
Huh?
David, how much control do we really have over this?
Well, my feeling is that this is where the issue of racial privilege and class struggle come together. There has to be we have to have a left wing of the Democratic Party, a progressive wing of the party, and those who are to the left of the party that are absolutely committed or raising at every point the issues of class solidarity across racial lines. So, for instance, here's an example. Black workers' jobs matter. This is an essay by Dean Baker and a colleague of his. Dean Baker is
I interviewed Dean Baker. He's a great guy.
Yeah, really, very, very thoughtful of the economic research and
he founded that. Yeah,
he founded that, and it's way to the left of the Economic Research Institute, which is kind of centrist Democrat. But he says that the pandemic is contributing to racial disparities in several ways, because the starving of state and local governments, which Mitch McConnell is trying to do, and the attempts to crack the post office, the U.S. Postal Service, are going to hit Black and other workers of color much harder, because they are disproportionately in those jobs. Do you know that 1/4 of the postal workforce is African American?
Yeah,
way out of double what their population is. If the post office goes, not only do Black workers lose those jobs, but those are good jobs.
Mm-hmm.
They come with retirement and health benefits,
Mm-hmm.
and the Republicans have been attacking the post office for decades now, and at the same time. So there's messages that are being sent out. The dog whistle messages are that I said this a couple of times already on this show, that Kemp is sending messages to people. We can reopen because most of the people who are going to die are Black.
Actually, that happened in Alabama. When they in Montgomery, Alabama, when the mayor wanted to to force masks and other things, well, 95% of the people in the ICU were Black, So they voted sort of on racial lines, and the doctors left there pissed off. But here's the funny part: one of the council members went home, and his wife told him, "Look at what you've just done. If that ICU looked differently, would your vote had been the same?" So that is good. But here's the ground that I try to talk, because I genuinely understand what Tamara is saying with all the workers that she represents, and this is where they put us at that between a rock and a hard place, right? Black and other minorities are predominate the deaths and the people getting sick, because they're the ones doing the jobs that more likely will get them sick. It's not that biologically speaking, they like to say things like these people have other preconditions. That's partially true, but it's mostly because they're working jobs that they can't stay behind the computer, or they can't stay behind. A lot of them, they're working the jobs that more are in contact with people. Hey, in slavery days, who took care of the babies? Who took care about? I mean, they were always working in these conditions that put them at risk. In Tamara's case, is like, and that is Tamara's answer, in my opinion. That's where they're working. That is where they're working until we have something else that levels the field, as you were talking about, David. What happens? They have to eat, and that is where I like that left-wing thing, and that says, hey, the same way we could have bailed out the corporations for other things, maybe we need to create money. Dean Baker speaks some of this as well. Maybe we need to create money and give it to these darn folks for a while. After all, we never got, she always says I'm not a DOS, so I'm not going to say we. They never got their mule and the 40 acres. So maybe it's damn time to pay and not look at that as some sort of a giveaway. But the reason the conditions are this way are completely and entirely systemic.
Let's we're gonna let Egberto head out. I want to thank Egberto for all that he's doing. Politics Done Right. You can find him Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. This man is everywhere. Politics Done Right with EgbertoWillies.com.
Thank you very much, Tamara. And David, y'all have a great show. Great show all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, so I want to read you something from Ted Allen. And this is from a thing he wrote in defense of affirmative action. This was 25 years ago when people weren't talking about reparations. But I see the logic of affirmative action as being the same logic as reparations. In other words, making repairs for damages, done that actually require that impose on European American working people an imperative for solidarity. In other words, if as we've talked about, 3 generations of workers, Black workers have twice the unemployment rate of white workers. The 3 generations through boom and bust of the cycle. It doesn't matter whether there's a depression or a boom going on. It doesn't matter what the level of education is. Black and white workers have had white workers have had half the unemployment rate of white workers. That's a racial privilege. All right, and it certainly seems like it's the right thing to do. Hey, my interests are that I have less risk of unemployment, right? But what the white blind spot doesn't allow European Americans to see is that the damages that causes to the ability of working people as a whole to fight for their interests, as a whole, as a class, is tremendously damaging, and does the lowered risk of unemployment that you get from the racial privilege is nowhere near what you still get unemployed. Anyway, this is what Ted Allen was saying about this whole cycle. Whenever the politics of wealth redistribution has been proposed, all right. In other words, what we're going through today, where there are people who are saying, we got to tax, we have to shift the wealth downward, redistribute the wealth downward. Whenever the politics of wealth distributed have been wealth redistributed, have proposed and actively attempted, the quote race card has proved to be Trump's. He wrote this in 1997 before it wasn't. It is precisely because of this attempt to avoid the issue of race that the reverse class discrimination strategy is doomed. In other words, we're all in it together, which is what you hear over and over again. Race-based affirmative action is an essential consciousness-raising precondition for making it possible to assure social reform is in the general interests of the lower socioeconomic strata, right? The 80% of us that are not either enablers or part of the ruling elite. So the point that Ted Allen is making here is that we can't get to the redistribution of wealth without there being solidarity. So if you don't put that first, in other words, getting the working class's house in order, right? You're not going to be able to do anything. You're not going to be able to win any of the things that everybody says that they want. There's no painless way to do this. In other words, the pain that comes from assuming greater risk, for yourself and your family, is part of what. That's what makes and breaks it or breaks a strike. Are people willing to sacrifice for each other? Assume collective risk. This is why, things like universal health care are really, really crucially important. We're not going to get universal health care unless the working class understands that there's unless European American workers are willing to give up, for instance, their union-based health insurance. Their private, employer-based health insurance. They have to, quote, give that up in order for the entire, and the potential that's there for what happens when you have what they call a universal risk pool. In other words, everybody in the same risk, is that we share we share the risks. If somebody gets cancer, we all pay for protection. The other thing that happens with that situation is we begin to think about and learn, how do we prevent cancer, right? Instead of just treating it, how do we prevent it? There's that old story about the two guys are fishing, and
the profiting is in the treatment. That's where they're making most of their profits.
Exactly. That's the point, that when you create a universal risk pool, everybody is committed to making to reducing the costs of healthcare, of finding good ways to keep people healthy as opposed to fix them when they're sick. And that's going to
patch them up. They're not even trying to fix them, David. They're just trying to patch them up so they can continue
so they can go back to work and make more profits for the bosses. Mm-hmm. That's the arrangement. That's the system. So if we're talking about universal health care, that's one of the most important aspects of it. It entirely shifts the model, the paradigm for healthcare into wellness and prevention and keeping people healthy, and getting rid of things like high fructose corn syrup and all of these other sugar-based foods and there's just all of these things. I mean, and that comes out of solidarity. Being in the same risk pool means being in solidarity with one another, and understanding that your health is that my health is dependent on your health. Yeah. Yeah. And other societies have done it. They have done it even without without being having revolutionary, changes in their in their economic structure. All over Europe and Japan and Korea, they all have national health insurance systems, not national health systems, but insurance systems where we're all in the same risk pool. And it builds consciousness, it builds solidarity, in a society as a whole. And so it's anathema here. And everybody.
Capitalism, that's what it is. It's about competition. It's about me competing with you and who can get there first. And it's not about us, the collective. It's about me or you and whoever the winner is. But that's the country that we live in, David.
It's a dog eat dog. Yeah, it's a dog eat dog, blah, 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 all of that other stuff. But the fact is that in the United States, it's even more important because it maintains the structural inequality of white supremacy. And that makes it much harder for working people to see their interests in Medicare for all or a universal health insurance system. And so, even other capitalist countries have been able to do this. But this country, the social control system and if we don't recognize that, if we don't address that directly, we're not going to get there. That's what Ted is saying. We're not going to get to that place unless we do that. Okay.
All right. We're at the top of the hour. David was on fire today. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. I am your candidate for the United States Senate. She says, get you a t-shirt today. Absolutely. You can find me at tamaraforgeorgia.com. You can always find Mr. David Slavin right here on Facebook at Acknowledge the Divide. We will see you next week. We'll be back with all the issues and the updates and advocacy and activism right here in the great state of Georgia. David?
And I'll say what Ted Allen used to say: solidarity forever means privileges never. Power to the people.
Power to the people, everybody. Have a great week.
Take care, everybody.